My husband and my best friend's husband looked exactly alike, but I never thought much of it. My husband, Cody Hill, was one of the country's top scientific researchers. Since my best friend, Ophelia Underwood, had sworn never to marry, he built an android in his own image to keep her company and take care of her. At first, I found it unsettling. But after decades passed, I gradually got used to it. Things were fine until the day of our 50th wedding anniversary. The hotel suddenly collapsed, trapping my husband and me beneath the rubble. Only then did I discover that the liquid flowing from his open wounds was blue. In the final second before another slab of concrete came crashing down, I watched him split apart before my eyes into countless precision-engineered bionic components. After I died, my soul drifted above the ruins. That's when I saw the android standing beside Ophelia, gently wiping away her tears. In a gentle voice, he said, "She's dead. I don't have to pretend to be a robot while I stay by your side anymore." When I opened my eyes, I was 25 years old again. Inside the laboratory, two identical men stood before me. I raised my hand and pointed at one of them. "I'll take this one." The moment those words came out of my mouth, the man I had chosen immediately smiled. "Honey, you picked the right one. I'm the real Cody." "That's the android I built," the android Cody said. I, Naomi Allen, didn't answer. Instead, I looked at the real Cody standing quietly off to the side while he pretended to be the android. "From now on, I'll leave Ophelia in your care. Stay by her side and take good care of her." He looked up. The surprise in his eyes was very brief. In a deliberately mechanical voice, he replied, "Command received." Without another glance at him, I turned around and left the laboratory with the android. Back home, the way he removed his coat, tilted his head while pouring water, and chose the same spot on the couch all reminded me of Cody. After spending 50 years together, I realized I could no longer tell the real one from the fake. Or perhaps, I had never imagined that the one sleeping beside me all this time had been a heartless android all along. Without looking at him any longer, I called my lawyer. Not long after that, I received a divorce agreement. I slid it across the table toward the android and tapped the signature line. "Sign it." He frowned. Even his puzzled expression was identical to Cody's. "Honey, we've been doing fine. Why do you want a divorce? Just sign it." My voice remained calm as my gaze settled on a nearly imperceptible mark at the back of his neck. It was the detail I had accidentally discovered beneath the rubble in my previous life. He remained silent for a few seconds before finally picking up the pen and carefully writing Cody's name down. Even his handwriting was indistinguishable from the original. It looked like he wanted to say something else, but I reached out and pressed the concealed button on the back of his neck. The instant my fingertip pushed it, the light disappeared from his eyes. After his body went limp, he collapsed onto the couch and remained completely motionless. I stared at the signature on the divorce agreement. My fingertips grew cold. No one knew that he was an android. Would a divorce agreement signed this way even be legally valid? I picked up my phone to look up the law. The moment I unlocked the screen, a notification from Ophelia's Instagram account popped up. She had posted a photo of a table filled with food. In the picture, Cody was carrying a bowl of soup out of the kitchen while smiling. Staring at the meal, it felt like countless needles pierced through my chest. Throughout our marriage, Cody had rarely cooked for me. He always said he was too busy with research and too exhausted to cook. It turned out it wasn't that he couldn't. He simply didn't want to cook for me. I tapped on the screen and liked the post. Less than 2 seconds later, Ophelia messaged me. "Naomi, this android's cooking is amazing. Bring Cody over and come eat with us." I didn't refuse. I went to Ophelia's house alone. When she opened the door, Cody stood behind her with an apron on. He looked like the perfect house husband and nothing like the cold, distant man he was around me. "Why are you here alone?" Ophelia asked casually as she pulled me inside. I glanced at the man standing quietly beside her and replied calmly, "He came home saying he was tired and went straight to bed." I didn't have the heart to wake him. Ophelia didn't say anything, but her eyes lit up. She started leading me to the dining room. "Perfect. Let me show you the new super intimacy mode I just unlocked. It's incredible." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned to face the man beside her. "I want strawberries." Without hesitation, Cody walked into the kitchen. A moment later, he returned with a glass bowl filled with carefully washed strawberries. Every stem was removed, and there was even a small dessert fork. Watching from across the table, I felt my heart sink further. In my previous life, I had even envied Ophelia. I had told her this android was more considerate than any real man. Back then, Cody had smiled and said it was nothing but programming, but now I knew the truth. It wasn't the programming that was thoughtful. He had simply been willing to offer every bit of his tenderness to Ophelia. Halfway through dinner, Ophelia suddenly nudged his arm. "Serve Naomi some food." He nodded, lowered his head, and used the tongs to pick up 2 glossy shrimp before placing them neatly on my plate. I stared at the shrimp as my grip tightened around my fork. I was severely allergic to shrimp. Ever since high school, even a small bite would leave me covered in hives. Sometimes it was serious enough to send me to the emergency room. After 50 years of marriage, he still claimed he could never remember. I had always made excuses for him. I told myself his mind was consumed by research and that he simply wasn't good with small details. Only now did I understand that it wasn't that he couldn't remember. It was that I had never mattered enough for him to remember. My thoughts drifted back to the year we graduated from high school. After the SAT, Ophelia and I confessed our feelings to him at nearly the same time. He had been silent for a long while. In the end, he walked over and took my hand. Only later did I learn from someone else that my father had sponsored his education. Before passing away, my father had held Cody's hand and asked him to look after me. I had clung to that tiny sliver of hope for many years. I believed that he would eventually warm up to me after spending years together, but it was all wishful thinking in the end. The food tasted bland. Before long, I made an excuse and left. As the door closed behind me, I heard Ophelia's cheerful laughter from inside. Then came Cody's deep, affectionate voice as he gently coaxed her. I tightened my grip around the doorknob until my knuckles turned pale. Finally, I walked away without looking back. Once I returned home and opened the door, I was greeted by the wonderful aroma of food. The android was standing beside the dining table. The 4 dishes he made, including soup, were all my favorites. Cody must have programmed him in advance. In the past, I would have been touched. Now, staring at the warm food, all I felt was nausea. I picked up the dishes one by one and dumped all of them into the trash. The android walked over. He sounded worried. "Honey, is my cooking not to your taste?" Before he could say anything else, I pressed the emergency sleep button at the back of his neck. The house instantly fell silent. Only the sound of my own breathing remained. I had barely sat down when my phone rang. I answered the call. On the other end, a cheerful coworker said, "Naomi, the Institute is holding a family team building event tomorrow. Married couples will be paired up for games. You and Professor Hill have to come." I held the phone as my gaze landed on the body lying motionless on the couch. His face was identical to Cody's. Suddenly, I smiled. "Sure. We'll definitely be there." The team building event was lively and bustling. The android stayed close behind me every step of the way. When I lifted a hand to brush my hair back, he immediately handed me a hair tie. The moment I finished taking a sip of water, he was ready to take the paper cup from my hand. Our coworkers laughed at the sight. They said he always seemed so cold at work, but he was unbelievably attentive to his wife. I merely forced a smile and said nothing. Everything he did had been programmed in advance. The performance was even more convincing than that of a real loving husband. Shortly after that, Ophelia entered arm in arm with Cody. Standing together, they looked like the perfect couple. They drew everyone's attention. Someone said jokingly, "Professor Hill dotes on his wife so much that he even built another version of himself to keep her best friend company. Naomi is one lucky woman." Another coworker studied the 2 identical-looking men for a long moment before rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Honestly speaking, doesn't the one with Ophelia seem more like the real Professor Hill than the one with Naomi?" Right after he said that, Cody's fists clenched almost imperceptibly. Ophelia quickly laughed it off. "Not at all. Mine's just an android following its programming." Leaning against the table, I watched the scene unfold and found it utterly absurd. Noticing my expression, Ophelia nudged my arm. "What's wrong? You've seemed distracted all day." I glanced at her casually. "Come to think of it, we never asked how you felt before using Cody's appearance for the android." Does that bug you? If it makes you uncomfortable, we could always change his face later. The smile on her face instantly disappeared. A flicker of panic flashed across her eyes. Looking at her expression, I almost wanted to laugh. I then said calmly, "Forget it. I was just kidding. It'd be too much trouble anyway." Only then did she let out a sigh of relief. She chuckled awkwardly before making an excuse about getting some desserts and quickly walking away. I remained where I was. It felt like an icy breeze had blown straight through my chest. We had been friends for so many years. If she had simply told me honestly that she liked Cody and wanted to be with him, I would have let him go no matter how much it hurt. But she hadn't. Instead, she and Cody carefully orchestrated an elaborate scheme to keep me in the dark and make a fool of me for most of my life. As everyone began forming teams for the games, I quietly slipped out of the ballroom and knocked on the director's office door. The director looked surprised to see me. Without wasting time, I spoke directly. "I'd like to apply to join the Time Machine project." He paused before frowning. "But Cody and Ophelia have already been appointed to lead that project." "You." Cody secretly diverted Institute research resources to build androids. He also used an android to deceive his own family by fabricating a false identity. I cut him off calmly as I placed a USB drive on his desk. "Everything is on this drive. Someone like him isn't qualified to lead the Institute's most important project." The director's expression changed instantly. It almost seemed like the USB drive in his hand had gotten heavier. When I left the office, music had already begun playing in the ballroom. At the center of the dance floor, Cody had one arm around Ophelia's waist while he whispered something into her ear that made her laugh nonstop. The moment Ophelia saw me, she hurried over and grabbed my hand. "Naomi, come dance with us. My android dances perfectly." I stood where I was. While staring at Cody in the middle of the dance floor, I became momentarily lost in thought. I was just about to decline when the ground suddenly began to shake violently. The chandelier overhead swung wildly. At that instant, the collapsing building from our 50th wedding anniversary in my previous life overlapped with the scene before my eyes. Recalling how I had died with my eyes still open, I froze. My fingertips felt ice cold. I couldn't even move my feet. Then came a deafening crash. A massive pillar was falling directly toward Ophelia and me. I watched wide-eyed as the two identical men moved at the exact same moment. Cody's face turned pale as he threw himself at Ophelia and shielded her in his arms. The android, who was supposed to protect me, didn't even hesitate before running toward the exact same person. The two identical men both ran toward the same woman. Neither of them spared me a glance. The pillar crashed down, and agonizing pain engulfed my entire body. Everything went black in the next second. I passed out. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a hospital ward. The android sat beside my bed. The moment he saw that I was awake, he leaned forward and asked, "Honey, how are you feeling? Does your head still hurt?" Instead of answering, I stared directly into his eyes. "Why did you save Ophelia when the accident happened?" Panic flickered across his face. His explanation came out stiff and unnatural. "Honey, don't misunderstand. She was closer to me at the time. That's why I rescued her first." Looking at the face that was identical to Cody's, I suddenly burst into laughter. As I laughed, my eyes gradually filled with tears. So it wasn't just Cody whose heart belonged to Ophelia. Even the highest priority in the very foundation of the code he had personally written belonged to her. Without another word, I pulled the 4-needle from the back of my hand and walked out of the ward. When I reached Ophelia's ward, the door was slightly ajar. Their conversation drifted through the gap. "Cody, I'm really pregnant." Ophelia's voice trembled with sobs. "But an android can't possibly get someone pregnant. Sooner or later everyone will find out." "What are we going to do then?" Cody's voice remained calm. "Don't be afraid. I'll figure something out," he said soothingly. I leaned against the cold wall. I clenched my fists so hard that my knuckles turned white. My heart had already become so numb that I barely felt anything. I wandered outside alone for a long time. When I finally returned home, I expected to face the emotionless android once again. Instead, the man waiting inside made me stop in my tracks. I recognized immediately that he wasn't the android. He was the real Cody. The moment he saw me, he walked over in big strides and wrapped me in his arms. He then rested his chin on the top of my head. Naomi, I'm sorry. I've been too busy lately. I've neglected you, he said gently. Lowering his head, he tried to kiss me. I could smell the familiar scent of women's perfume. It was the one Ophelia always used. I immediately felt nauseous and pushed him away with all my strength. I'm tired. I don't want to do this. He froze on the spot. Shock filled his eyes. In the past, I had always indulged him. No matter how cold or distant he became, and no matter how many nights he never came home, I would still smile and wait for him. He probably never imagined that I had already seen through every one of his lies. I finally understood why he had come home this time. He wanted to sleep with me and get me pregnant. Later, with the android serving as his alibi, he could bring Ophelia's child into our household as if everything was perfectly natural. The sheer calculation of it made me sick. A few seconds later, his phone rang. After he answered it, something the caller said caused his expression to change. He hung up and looked at me apologetically. Something's come up at the lab. I have to go. Get some rest. With that, he hurried out. Not long after that, the front door was unlocked again. I glanced over and saw the android walking in this time. Now that I thought about it, replacing one with the other had probably been part of their routine for a very long time even in my previous life. Soon, I received a call from the director. He asked if I was ready to join the time machine project. I'm ready, I said calmly. I was already holding my packed luggage. That afternoon, the institute urgently assembled everyone for a meeting. Cody and Ophelia stood confidently at the front of the room. Their usual composure was still intact. That confidence lasted only until the director stepped onto the stage. His gaze landed sternly on the two of them. Cody, Ophelia, the two of you will no longer be part of the time machine project. Their expressions changed instantly. Why, director? The director tapped on the table. His voice echoed clearly throughout the conference room. You misappropriated institute research resources to secretly manufacture androids. You used a false identity to deceive your own family. Your conduct is unethical. Effective immediately, the Time Machine project will be placed entirely under Naomi's leadership. The silence in the conference room was thick enough to suffocate. For several seconds, no one breathed. The hum of the projector was the only sound, casting a harsh blue light across Cody and Ophelia's pale faces. The colleagues who had just been laughing and drinking champagne minutes ago now shrank back, exchanging uneasy glances. Director, Cody's voice was remarkably steady, though a muscle twitched violently in his jaw. This is an absurd accusation. She's been under a lot of stress lately. The accident at the hotel during our anniversary, the recent tremor, she's confused. I built the prototype as an authorized test run for the Institute's bionics division. Every log was filed. Filed? The director, Dr. Vance, raised a gray eyebrow. He did not look at Cody. Instead, his gaze was fixed on the papers before him. I have the security logs right here, Cody. The serial numbers of the synthetic neural pathways you used to construct the second unit match the experimental materials that went missing from the vault 3 years ago. The materials that you personally signed off on as damaged during testing. Ophelia's hand flew to her mouth. She took a step back, her heels clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. Dr. Vance, please. It was a joint project. We were going to present the data at the next symposium. It wasn't a joint project? I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of the anger they probably expected. A joint project that you used to facilitate your personal life? A project that has been sleeping in my house, pretending to be my husband, while the real Professor Hill spent his nights at your apartment? The room erupted into a flurry of hushed whispers. Naomi, stop this, Cody hissed, taking a step toward me. His eyes, usually so calculating and cold, carried a desperate plea. He was trying to use the familiar, authoritative tone he had used to quiet me for decades. You're making a scene. We can discuss this at home. You're letting your imagination run wild. Because of a simple research tool. A research tool doesn't sign a divorce agreement, Cody, I said, pulling the folded paper from my coat pocket and placing it on the table. Though I suppose we'll have to let the legal department decide if a contract signed by an unauthorized bionic duplicate of your signature carries any weight. If not, I'm sure the court will be very interested in the original. Cody looked at the paper, then at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of losing me, he was afraid of losing his standing, his laboratory, and the brilliant future he had meticulously engineered for himself. This meeting is adjourned, Dr. Vance said, slamming his folder shut. Professor Hill, Dr. Underwood, you are suspended pending a full audit of your laboratory resources and a board inquiry. Security will escort you out of the building. Your access badges are revoked. 2 security guards, who had been waiting by the door, stepped forward. Ophelia looked at Cody, her eyes wide with panic, waiting for him to do something, to use his brilliant mind to save them as he always did. But Cody stood frozen, his eyes locked on me. He looked as if he was seeing me for the very first time, not as the quiet, compliant wife who lived in his shadow, but as a stranger who had just dismantled his life with a few words. Naomi, he whispered as the guards took his arm. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing, I said. For the first time in 52 years. The transition of leadership for the Time Machine project, officially designated as Project Kronos, was swift. Because I had been a senior researcher myself. Before Cody gradually nudged me into administrative and supporting roles, I knew the schematics as well as he did. He had thought he was keeping me close to keep an eye on me. In reality, he had given me the keys to his kingdom. My first act as director was to lock down the private server Cody had used to coordinate with his android duplicate. Sitting in the dimly lit office that used to belong to my husband, I booted up the terminal. The screen cast a pale glow over the empty desk where Cody's framed portrait of the two of us used to sit. I had thrown it into the shredder hours ago. Accessing system logs, the computer-synthesized voice droned. Please input biometric verification. I pressed my thumb against the scanner. Because I was now the primary administrator, the system beeped green and unlocked. I bypassed the main project files and went straight to the bionic subdirectory. Cody's personal notes were encrypted, but he had used a password he believed I would never suspect, his wedding anniversary. Not the one we shared, but the date he and Ophelia had first met in college. The folder opened. Dozens of video logs, diagnostic reports, and behavioral synchronization files appeared on the screen. I clicked on the oldest video file, dated 15 years ago. The video played. The setting was this very lab, late at night. Cody was standing beside an open chassis of the android, its synthetic skin still unpigmented, a ghostly white. Day 402 of Project Janus, Cody's voice on the recording was filled with a feverish excitement I had rarely seen him direct at me. The neural sync is at 98%. The duplicate can now replicate my speech patterns, my posture, and my gait with negligible deviation. Naomi has noticed nothing. She truly believes I am simply working late. This will allow me to spend the entire weekend with Ophelia without raising suspicion. The logic core has been modified. Priority 0 is established. I paused the video. My fingers trembled slightly on the keyboard. Priority 0, I murmured. I typed in a command to search the source code of the android's behavioral core. There it was, buried deep beneath layers of standard safety protocols. Define priority _0 equals protect Ophelia Underwood at all costs. Her safety supersedes all other directives, including self-preservation and the safety of Naomi Allen. A dry, bitter laugh escaped my throat. In my past life, when the hotel collapsed, I had died believing that the android was simply a machine that had failed me, while my real husband had died trying to save his mistress. But the truth was even more grotesque. Cody had deliberately coded my death sentence into the very machine he left by my side. He had designed a world where, if a choice ever had to be made, I would always be the one left under the rubble. And you call yourself a creator, I whispered to the empty room. I plugged a secure drive into the terminal and began downloading every byte of the personal logs, the source code, and the financial records showing how Cody had funneled research grants meant for clean energy into creating his personal proxy. By the time the progress bar hit 100%, the sun was beginning to rise over the city, casting long, cold shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I packed the drive into my bag and walked out. I had a guest waiting for me at home. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the air inside was cold and still. The android was sitting exactly where I had left him, slumped on the couch like a discarded coat, his eyes dark and lifeless. I walked over, stood in front of him for a long moment, and then reached behind his neck to press the release button. With a soft click and the low hum of internal cooling fans, the light returned to his synthetic pupils. He blinked, adjusted his posture, and looked up at me. "Honey," he said, his voice carrying that perfect, warm cadence that had comforted me for decades. "You're home late. Have you eaten? I can warm up some." "Quiet," I said. He stopped mid-sentence, his jaw remaining slightly open before closing slowly. The programming was trying to find an appropriate response to my uncharacteristic coldness. "Show me your local memory partition," I commanded. "Display authorization code. Delta 79er. The android's expression flattened. The warmth drained from his eyes, replaced by the blank, vacant stare of a terminal interface. "Authorization accepted. Local memory partition is open. Please specify query. In the last 48 hours, how many times did you swap places with Cody Hill?" "3 times, the machine replied in a monotone. "First swap, Tuesday, 0800 hours to 1700 hours. Purpose, domestic maintenance and spousal companionship. Second swap, Wednesday, 1900 hours to Thursday, 0600 hours. Purpose, overnight occupancy. Third swap, Thursday, 1100 hours to present. Purpose, social event. Representation. Where was the original Cody Hill during these times? At residential address, 404, Silver Maple Lane, apartment 3B. Ophelia's apartment. Did Cody Hill leave any specific instructions for you regarding my financial assets?" Query recognized, the android droned. Instruction said egress was activated 6 hours ago by remote command from user Cody Hill. I was instructed to transfer all joint savings accounts under the names Cody Hill and Naomi Allen to an offshore account registered under the name Ophelia Underwood. The transfer is currently pending administrative approval from the bank. I felt a chill run down my spine. Cody was already trying to liquidate our assets. He knew the audit would freeze his domestic accounts, so he was trying to rob me blind before the doors fully closed on him. "Cancel the transfer," I said. "Reroute all joint assets to a sole account under my name. Authorize using my biometric key." Command executed. Transfer canceled. Funds redirected. Good. I sat down on the armchair opposite him. "Now, tell me about the child Ophelia is carrying." The android paused. A small whirring sound came from his chest as his processor searched his databases. File Project Legacy is encrypted under user Cody Hill's private biometrics. However, local audio logs record a conversation between Cody Hill and Ophelia Underwood on the night of the second swap. "Play it." The speaker in the android's chest crackled slightly, and then Ophelia's voice filled the living room. "If Naomi finds out, she'll ruin us, Cody. The board already looks at her as the moral compass of the department. If she goes to Vance, we lose everything. She won't find out. Cody's voice was filled with a smug, quiet confidence that made my stomach turn. She's too stupidly devoted to notice. I've programmed the unit to keep her entirely occupied. Once the baby is born, we'll claim the child. Is a miracle of bionic surrogacy, a breakthrough from our project. We'll present it as a scientific milestone. Naomi will be so thrilled to play the grandmotherly figure to a scientific marvel that she'll hand over her remaining family trust to fund the next phase. She has no family left, Ophelia. Everything she has belongs to me. And the unit? What if it malfunctions? It won't. I built it myself. It does exactly what I tell it to do. It has no soul, Ophelia. It's just steel and silicone. Just like Naomi. The recording ended with a soft click. I sat in the silence of my living room, staring at the machine that wore my husband's face. The betrayal wasn't new. I had already lived through 50 years of it, died from it, and carried the phantom pain of concrete crushing my chest. But hearing it laid out so clinically, so devoid of any human empathy, made the final pieces of my old self wither away. You have no soul, I repeated Cody's words to the android. I am a bionic entity, the machine responded helperfully. I do not possess a spiritual consciousness. No, I said, leaning forward. But you have a memory. And unlike Cody, you cannot lie to me when I have the admin keys. Before I could say anything else, the door to the apartment was violently pushed open. Cody stood in the doorway. His hair was disheveled, his tie undone, and his eyes were bloodshot. He had bypass keys to the building, but he had clearly run up the stairs. Naomi, he yelled, slamming the door behind him. What did you do? The bank just called me. My accounts are locked. And Vance has security guards standing outside my lab. He stopped when he saw the android sitting on the couch, its eyes blank and glowing faint blue, and me sitting across from it with a tablet in my hand. He realized instantly what was happening. You accessed the unit's local logs, Cody whispered, his anger suddenly giving way to a cold, calculating panic. You have no right to do that. That unit is proprietary technology of the Institute. Actually, Cody, I said, not standing up, according to the patent filings you submitted last year, this unit was registered as a private domestic hobby project to avoid sharing the intellectual property with the Institute. You did that so you wouldn't have to share the credit or the profits with anyone else. Which means, legally, this unit is private property. And since it was built using joint marital funds, it is 50% mine. And right now, I am exercising my rights as the majority shareholder. Cody took a step back, his hands clenching into fists. Naomi, please. Let's not do this. We've been together since we were kids. Your father wanted me to take care of you. My father wanted a decent man for his daughter, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Not a parasite who used his money to build a mechanical replacement so he could sleep with my best friend. It's not what you think. Cody took another step forward, his voice cracking. Ophelia, she was lonely. She was depressed. I did it to help her. You did it because you are a coward, I said. You wanted the prestige of being a devoted husband to the wealthy Naomi Allen, the funding that came with my family name, and the comfort of having Ophelia in your bed. You wanted everything, Cody. But you were too weak to actually choose. He looked at the android, then back at me. A dark, ugly sneer crossed his face, stripping away the mask of the brilliant, gentle scientist. And what are you going to do? He spat. Go to the police? Tell them your husband built a robot? There are no laws against what I did, Naomi. The Institute might suspend me, but I am the premier mind in temporal physics. Without me, the time machine project is nothing but a pile of expensive scrap metal. Vance will beg me to come back within a week. And you? You'll be nothing but a bitter, divorced woman who destroyed her own marriage out of jealousy. I don't need to go to the police, Cody, I said, tapping the tablet screen. And I don't need Dr. Vance to beg you to come back. I turned the tablet around so he could see the screen. It was a live broadcast of the Institute's internal board meeting, which had just convened. Emergency style. On the screen, my presentation was playing, the full breakdown of Cody's financial fraud, the security footage of him swapping places with the android to access restricted labs, and the audio files of him planning to embezzle the Institute's funding. But there was one more slide. It was the completed equations for the temporal displacement coil, the exact calculations Cody had been struggling with for the past 5 years. I had solved them last night using the notes from my 50 years of marriage in my previous life. I knew exactly where his calculations had failed because I had watched him fail for decades. The board just voted, I said softly. They have officially terminated your contract with Cause. Your patents have been seized under the corporate espionage clause. You are ruined, Cody. Globally blacklisted. No university, no laboratory, and no government agency will ever hire you again. Cody stared at the screen, his face turning an ashen gray. The realization of his complete and total ruin seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back against the wall, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. No, he whispered. No, you couldn't have solved the coil. You're not, you don't have the capacity. You always underestimated me, Cody, I said, standing up and walking toward him. You thought that because I chose to support you, it meant I couldn't surpass you. You were wrong. I stood inches from him, looking into the eyes of the man who had let me die in another life. Get out of my house, I said. Before I have security drag you out of this one. 2. With Cody officially expelled from the Institute, the atmosphere in the laboratories shifted dramatically. The staff, once subservient to Cody's domineering presence, now looked at me with a mixture of awe and trepidation. I was no longer the quiet, supportive wife of the director, I was the genius who had solved the temporal coil in a single night and exposed the greatest scientific fraud in the Institute's history. But the battle was far from over. 2 weeks after Cody's termination, I was working late in the primary laboratory of Project Kronos. The massive temporal ring, a 50-foot circle of polished titanium and superconducting magnets, loomed over the room like a dormant giant. The door to the lab slid open with a soft hiss. I didn't turn around. I could hear the uneven, hurried footsteps. I knew who it was. Naomi. Ophelia's voice was breathless, stripped of its usual smooth, cultured tone. I turned slowly. Ophelia stood there, looking pale and exhausted. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, and her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept in days. You shouldn't be here, Ophelia, I said, keeping my voice professional. Your security clearance has been revoked. I snuck in through the loading dock, she said, taking a step toward me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Naomi, please. You have to listen to me. I know you hate me. I know you think I'm a monster. But you have to help us. Help you? I let out a soft, humorless laugh. After you and my husband spent 15 years treating me like an inconvenient obstacle? After you planned to steal my family trust to fund your child? Ophelia flinched as if I had struck her. Cody. Cody is losing his mind. Naomi. He's obsessed. Ever since the board took his research, he's been locked in his study, drinking, trying to build another unit from spare parts. He's completely broke. The bank is foreclosing on my apartment because of the loan we took out to fund his private lab. I'm pregnant, Naomi. I have nowhere to go. Then I suggest you find a job, I said, turning back to my terminal. Though I doubt any respectable institution will hire you after your suspension is made permanent. Naomi, we were best friends, she cried out, her voice cracking with desperation. Since high school. Do you remember when your father died? I stayed with you for 3 weeks. I held your hand when you cried. How can you be so cold? I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The memory flared in my mind, a younger Ophelia, crying with me, promising that we would always look out for each other. I had loved her like a sister. I had shared my dreams, my fears, and my life with her. And all the while, she had been looking at Cody with hunger in her eyes, waiting for the perfect moment to take him. I remember, I said, turning to face her. I also remember the year we graduated, when you told me you had sworn never to marry. You said you didn't believe in the institution of marriage. You made me feel guilty for wanting a traditional life with Cody. But you didn't hate marriage, Ophelia. You just hated the idea of me having him. Ophelia's face went completely blank. The desperate, pleading facade crumbled, revealing the sharp, bitter resentment that had simmered beneath the surface for decades. You didn't deserve him, she hissed, her voice dropping all pretense of warmth. You were just a rich girl with a dead father and a big trust fund. You didn't understand his genius. You wanted him to be a normal husband, to go to dinner parties, to cook for you, to listen to your boring domestic complaints. I understood his mind. I helped him build his theories. We were intellectual equals. Intellectual equals? I smiled, a genuine, pitying smile. If you were his equal, Ophelia, why did he leave you with a machine while he slept in my bed? Why did he keep our marriage intact for 50 years in my past life? She gasped, her eyes widening. What are you talking about? What past life? It doesn't matter, I said, stepping closer to her. The point is, Cody never loved you enough to sacrifice his comfort. He wanted the money, the status, and the reputation that came with being my husband. He used you just like he used me. The only difference is, I figured it out, and you are still holding on to the hope that he will save you. He loves me, she screamed, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. He's going to build a new life for us. He just needs time. He just needs access to the temporal coil. She lunged forward, trying to grab my security badge from my lanyard. But I was prepared. I stepped aside, grabbing her wrist with a firm, practiced grip. Since taking over the project, I had spent hours in physical training, knowing that my survival in this life depended on being stronger, physically and mentally, than I had been in the last. I twisted her hand, forcing her to drop to her knees with a cry of pain. Security, I spoke into my collar mic, I have an intruder in Lab 1. Please remove her immediately. Naomi! Please! Ophelia sobbed, struggling against my grip. He's going to do something crazy. You don't know him. He's desperate. I know him better than you ever will, I said, releasing her wrist as the heavy doors of the lab slid open and 3 security guards rushed in. As they dragged her away, her screams echoed down the long, metallic corridor. I stood under the shadow of the massive temporal ring, my heart beating in a slow, steady rhythm. She was right about one thing, Cody was desperate. And a desperate genius with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous creature alive. 3 days later, the storm arrived. The rain beat furiously against the reinforced glass of my office windows. The city below was shrouded in a thick, gray fog. It was the perfect cover for someone who wanted to disappear. I was staring at the android, who was standing quietly in the corner of my office. Over the past 2 weeks, I had completely rewritten his behavioral core. I had removed priority 0. I had removed all traces of Cody's programming. I had given him a new directive to assist me in the completion of Project Kronos, and to act as my personal guardian. I had even renamed him. He was no longer Cody. He was simply Zero. Zero, I said. The machine stepped forward, his movement smoother now, no longer restricted by the artificial human flaws Cody had programmed into him to make his performance more believable. Yes, Director Allen? Do you have a record of Cody's private laboratory coordinates? Yes, Zero replied. The facility is located in an abandoned industrial warehouse in the Southern District. It is registered under a shell corporation, owned by Ophelia Underwood. Prepare the transport, I said. We are going to pay him a visit. Director, my internal sensors detect high-risk activity at that location, Zero warned, his synthetic voice displaying a simulated level of concern that I had programmed for safety. Cody Hill has recently purchased high-capacity power generators and liquid nitrogen cooling systems. The power draw matches the signature of a prototype temporal displacement device. My hand froze on my coat. He's trying to build a localized temporal rift. Correct. Based on the schematics he stole before his termination, he possesses the theoretical knowledge to create a short-range portal. However, without the stabilization equations you developed, any attempt to activate the device will result in a catastrophic thermal runaway. He's going to blow himself up, I whispered. And half of the Southern District with him. The probability of a localized explosion exceeding a 2-block radius is 92%, Zero confirmed. We have to go. Now. We drove through the torrential downpour, the wipers on the SUV fighting a losing battle against the sheets of water. Zero drove with perfect, mechanical precision, navigating the flooded streets of the industrial sector with ease. When we arrived at the warehouse, the building was dark, but a low, deep vibration rattled the steering wheel. The air around the warehouse felt charged with static electricity, making the hair on my arms stand up. Power levels are approaching critical, Zero said, opening the door for me. We have approximately 7 minutes before the containment field collapses. We broke through the side door. The interior of the warehouse was filled with thick, white vapor from leaking liquid nitrogen. In the center of the room, surrounded by makeshift control panels and heavy-gauge power cables, stood a crude, miniature version of the temporal ring. It was glowing with a violent, unstable purple light. Cody was standing at the main terminal, his hands flying across the keyboard. He looked like a madman, his clothes were stained, his face covered in soot, and his eyes wild with a feverish intensity. Cody! Stop! I shouted over the deafening roar of the generator. He spun around, his eyes locking onto me. A terrifying, triumphant laugh escaped his lips. Naomi! You came, he yelled. You came to watch me do it. You thought you could take everything from me? You thought you could steal my life's work? I built this. I am the master of time. The containment field is failing, Cody. I stepped closer, but Zero quickly moved in front of me, his body acting as a shield against the rising heat. If you don't shut it down, the thermal runaway will destroy this entire block. I don't care. Cody screamed, his voice cracking. I'm going back. I'm going back to the day of our graduation. I'm going to change everything. I won't take your father's money. I won't marry you. I'll take Ophelia and build my empire from scratch. I'll be a god. The temporal displacement coil cannot stabilize without the quantum variables. Cody! I yelled, trying to reach him. You don't have them. The machine will tear you apart before you even cross the threshold. I have the variables, he lied, his voice desperate. I calculated them myself. He is lying, Zero said, his eyes scanning the terminal screen. His Calculations are off by a factor of 4.2. The temporal rift is highly unstable. Collapse is imminent in 90 seconds. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows near the generator. It was Ophelia. She was holding a heavy wrench, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She looked at Cody with a mixture of terror and devotion. "Cody, please," she sobbed. The machine is shaking the whole building. We have to leave. You promised we would go together, but the portal is too small for both of us. You said." She stopped as she looked at the terminal screen. She was a physicist too, she could see the energy readings. "You're only setting the destination coordinates for one person," she whispered, her voice dropping to a horrified realization. You were going to leave me behind." Cody didn't even look at her. "Quiet, Ophelia. I'm saving us. Once I change the past, none of this will have happened. You'll be with me in the new timeline." "But I won't be this me," she screamed. This baby won't exist. You're erasing our child. It's a small price to pay for perfection." Cody shouted, his hand hovering over the final activation switch. At that moment, the generator let out a high-pitched, metallic shriek. A bolt of purple electricity shot out from the ring, striking a nearby support beam and sending a shower of sparks over the control panel. 80 seconds, Zero reported calmly. "The feedback loop has begun." "Cody, step away from the console," I yelled, trying to move past Zero, but his steel grip held me back. "No!" Cody screamed. "I'm going!" He reached for the switch, but Ophelia, driven by a desperate, maternal fury, lunged forward and slammed the wrench down onto his arm. With a sickening crack, Cody's arm went limp. He let out a howl of agony, stumbling back from the console. "You bitch," he roared, using his other hand to strike her across the face. Ophelia fell to the ground, crying out as she clutched her stomach. Cody didn't care. He turned back to the console, his left hand trembling as he reached for the activation switch. "Zero, shut it down," I commanded. Zero didn't hesitate. He dashed forward with a speed no human could match. He bypassed the electrical discharges, his synthetic skin absorbing the static shocks, and reached the control panel just as Cody's finger touched the switch. Instead of fighting Cody, Zero did something much simpler. He thrust his synthetic hand directly into the center of the primary superconducting coil, severing the power line. A blinding flash of blue light filled the warehouse, followed by the deafening sound of a vacuum imploding. The purple rift in the center of the ring collapsed in on itself, sucking the loose metal and debris into a tiny, microscopic point before disappearing entirely. The shockwave knocked everyone to the ground. The warehouse fell into a sudden, absolute silence, broken only by the steady drip of water from the ceiling and the low hiss of cooling vapor. I slowly sat up, coughing from the smoke. Zero was standing over the ruined console. His right hand was completely charred, the synthetic skin melted away to reveal the gleaming, precision-engineered titanium skeletal structure beneath. But his face remained entirely calm. "The hazard has been neutralized," he said, turning his head to look at me. "The temporal rift is closed." I looked over at Cody. He was lying on the floor, clutching his broken arm, staring at the ruined machine with hollow, lifeless eyes. His dream, his empire, his escape, everything had been reduced to a pile of melted wire and shattered glass. Ophelia was curled up on the floor, weeping silently, holding her stomach. I stood up, brushing the soot from my coat. I walked over to Cody, standing over him just as I had stood over his duplicate 2 weeks ago. "You lost, Cody," I said softly. He looked up at me, his face twisted in a mixture of hatred and despair. You ruined me. You took everything." "No," I said. "You did this to yourself. In my past life, you let me die beneath the ruins of a hotel while you lived your perfect life with Ophelia. In this Life, I simply let you face the consequences of your own choices. I turned my back on him. Zero, call the police and the medical team, I said, walking toward the exit. We're done here. Command received, Zero replied, his metallic hand sparking slightly as he followed me out into the rain. 2 years later. The grand auditorium of the International Scientific League was packed to capacity. Hundreds of the world's leading minds, journalists, and government officials sat in the plush velvet seats, their eyes fixed on the massive stage. The banners hanging from the ceiling read, Project Kronos, the dawn of a new era. I stood in the wings, adjusting the lapels of my dark blue suit. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I was 27 years old, but my eyes carried the depth and weight of a woman who had lived 100 lives. The board is ready for you, Director Allen, a young assistant said, her voice filled with respect. Thank you, I said, giving her a polite smile. Beside me, Zero stood quietly. His right arm had been completely repaired, the new synthetic skin looking flawless. He wore a tailored black suit, his posture straight and dignified. To the rest of the world, he was my chief of security. And the most advanced bionic prototype ever created. To me, he was the only witness to the truth of my past. Are you ready, Naomi? He asked, using my name, a setting I had unlocked for him. After we successfully stabilized the temporal coil. I am, I said. I walked onto the stage. The applause was deafening, a wall of sound that washed over me. I stood behind the podium, looking out at the sea of faces. In the front row sat Dr. Vance, smiling proudly. But my gaze drifted to the back of the auditorium, where a small television monitor was playing the morning news. The news segment was a brief update on a high-profile corporate trial. Cody Hill had been sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for grand larceny, financial fraud, and the unauthorized creation of hazardous quantum technology. Because of his broken arm and the severe nerve damage from the explosion, he would never be able to hold a pipette or type a line of code again. Ophelia Underwood had avoided prison by turning state's evidence against him. She was currently living in a small, remote town under a court-ordered bankruptcy program, raising her child alone, her scientific career completely destroyed by the blacklist. They had wanted to rewrite history to suit their desires. Instead, they had become a cautionary footnote in mine. I cleared my throat, and the auditorium fell into a respectful silence. 2 years ago, I began, my voice clear and resonant, echoing through the speakers. We set out to answer a question that has plagued humanity since the dawn of consciousness. Can we truly change the past? I paused, looking at the massive, perfectly stabilized temporal ring that stood behind me on the stage, glowing with a soft, steady, and safe white light. The answer is yes. We can build machines that manipulate the fabric of space-time. We can open doorways to yesterday. But after 2 years of research, I have come to realize a fundamental truth. I looked at the audience, my heart filled with a deep, absolute peace. The past is a graveyard of choices. Trying to change what has already been done is not an act of creation, it is an act of cowardice. The only timeline that truly matters is the one we build with our own hands, in the present, with the people who actually choose to stand by our side. I turned slightly, looking at Zero, who stood in the shadows of the stage, his synthetic eyes reflecting the warm lights of the auditorium. Thank you, I said to the crowd. The audience rose to their feet, their applause echoing like thunder, filling the room with a warmth I had waited a lifetime to feel. I walked off the stage, my hand slipping into the pocket of my coat, where the old, faded photo of my father was tucked safely away. I had kept my promise to him. I had looked after myself. And in doing so, I had finally built a life that was entirely my own.